Yeah, and I was so bad.
Okay. All right. Okay, welcome back.
I was back on time.
So appreciated. Okay, so we are looking at issues in Israeli society through the arts. And Shari, you are up first.
Okay, so I can't assume that everybody read this poem, so I think maybe it would be a good idea for us to quickly read it together. So we're reading the poem, this is from, I remember her name, Ayat Abu Shis, a Palestinian woman, and we are going down to the poem, I Am Divided Into. Hi, David.
I'm pulling up. Do you mind tilting on the screen a little bit? I'm just seeing the ceiling right now.
Sorry.
Hi, there you are.
Woo-hoo! I'm sorry, which one? I Am Divided Into.
Where?
So it's Ayat Abu Shis.
Oh, the Palestinian Israeli.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. This is relationships and relations with the Palestinians. Okay. So everybody is there, and why don't we go ahead and start? I'll start with David. Do you want to read like maybe the first couple of lines, and then we'll just go around the room? Are you there?
There. You want me to just read through or read the first couple lines?
Just read like the first, maybe 2 or 4 lines.
Great. I'll read through Shabbat Shalom.
Okay.
Great. I'm divided in two, part A and part B, one side and the other, two opposites, but I'm close to them both. Morning, Manishma, Alhamdulillah, Wallah, Beseder, Yalla, Salamat, Kuni Bekesher, divided into Salam Aleichem and Shabbat Shalom.
Sydney, would you read the next couple of lines?
Upside down and me in the middle, a kind of mental complex, pulled in 2 directions. They'll tear me apart in the end in the most principled way. Their sunship piling up on my back like sand, and soon I'll disappear. But each time I shake off all that sand and stare.
The impossible in the face without written instructions. No one prepared me to be both. To be 2 halves and yet not both. But I've learned to live by halves. That's how I am, imperfect. I'm listening to it. Okay,
Wait.
we'll start with the next word. Is that oh, okay. I'm just.
I love people and can't stand symbols. Love the holidays and sometimes celebrate. I dreamt of living in peace and visiting my homeland, which now criticizes me. Every year and a half or 2, and I don't know how to accept this with love. Because in school I was taught only to read and write. They left out love of land.
But now I'm wiser, inside a rut. I've learned to discriminate years of identity. When I face the establishment with my documents and papers, they choose to ignore them and see only my language, my spoken language, my Arab eyes, my Muslim tongue.
Sometimes I quarrel with myself, force her to choose, but she cries, tells me one doesn't choose between father and mother. So the synopsis of this poem is that the author is a Palestinian Israeli living in the blended city of Yaffo, and she's exploring the feelings of being both and how it's impacted her. She goes through this prayer describing the duality, the conflict she feels, and the challenges that it presents her. She beautifully illustrates this duality using language colloquialisms. She includes a list of sayings that are blended expressions using both Hebrew and Arabic, like Kuni Kesher, for example, with Kuni being Arabic for manifesting, existing, or being, and the Kesher being Hebrew for connection or relationship or link. So I'm saying existing in connection. Would you use that? She describes feeling pulled in 2 directions between the 2 parts of herself. They'll tear me apart in the end. The poem communicates that there are no guidelines or instructions for how to navigate this duality, and that she identifies as being 2 halves and yet not yet whole. The author also expresses a love for people rather than symbols and beings, living in peace and being able to visit her homeland without receiving criticism by her people. On the other hand, she describes feeling very other in her experience living in Israel, and that despite her documents and papers indicating her citizenship, all they see are her Arab eyes and Muslim tongue. She describes the battle inside her, feeling the need to choose one side or the other, one side over the other, in comparison to choosing between parents. So that's the synopsis. The issues or aspects of Israel and challenges is so some of the issues that I picked up in reading the poem was that Arabs that opt. So I don't really know the correct word. I was always told Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis are citizens, but I've also seen Palestinian Israelis. So that might be.
So that's an issue of self-definition that has changed over time.
So would you say
So more recently, currently, one young woman who lives very comfortably as a citizen of Israel, Ayat Abu Shmish, she will self-identify as a Palestinian Israeli.
that's great?
And so Susie's 100% right there, self-identification. And I believe that even today, in 2022, it's a range of how citizens of Israel who are not Jewish identify. Okay, and it depends on all kinds of criteria that they, that people put on themselves.
Okay, very interesting.
Yeah.
So, Arabs or Palestinians that opt to become Israeli citizens can deal with an identity crisis. Another issue is that the culture is blended yet also very separate. Another issue is that there's some backlash among Palestinians that are not Israeli citizens. There's backlash from Palestinians that have chosen not to become Israeli citizens towards those that do become citizens. There is also some bias against those who do become citizens. So there is also some bias by Palestinian Israelis that do become citizens by the government officials. This according to the poem. And it seems that people in the poet's situation feel pressure to choose one identity over the other, which feels like an impossible choice to her. And Israel in this poem is presented as both a home she enjoys and a place she feels conflicted and other. I listened to the portion in the Rachel
Rachel Corazine.
and a host of other people. I watched amongst others this section, and
I gave you guys in the list, I gave you a link for enrichment to a session that this master teacher gave about the poetry of Ayat Abu Shmish. So that's what.
And they went through poem by poem, and in between there was a man playing some Turkish music, I believe. So in this particular one, and Rachel indicates that this poem caused, I think she heard her speak somewhere or knows her or something, but she made a comment that the poem has caused this poet a lot of difficulties because she, as an Arab woman, put the two sides, the Arab and the Israeli side, as father and mother. And she's, it's brought a lot of criticism upon her from her own community, from her own house and her Arab community. Some of the things that we talked about are the duality of the blended language, the colloquialisms, mixing language and expressions. Nobody tells you how to be two and yet not yet whole. And there was also a commentary about the word. I tried to find the word. I played it over and over again. I couldn't figure out which word she was talking about. But there was a word in Hebrew that could mean either visit or criticize.
So the vakir, so you could do a bikur cholim, like visiting the sick, and bikoret is critique or criticism.
So I think that, I don't know if that was sort of a play on words in the poem or something, saying, because they were talking about, she wasn't sure that she was saying that she was criticizing her homeland when she went there, or she was visiting and then being criticized by her homeland. But it was a little.
So point of clarification, what's so unique, first, she lives in Yafa, she calls it Yafa, which is what an Israeli, Arab or Palestinian would call it.
Yeah.
And she is a neighbor of Rachel Corazine, this master teacher of Israeli literature. And Rachel has convened a salon, like sit in the living room, kind of circles of poets and writers, and now this writer, Ayat Abu Shmish, has also been doing like a monthly thing for young Palestinian writers, but she writes in Hebrew. Just like there are other people who are famous for writing in Hebrew. She was actually educated at a kind of international school where she learned multiple languages, and she doesn't feel that her Arabic is strong enough. Her parents are absolutely Arabs. She was raised in a Palestinian identifying home, but she doesn't feel that she expresses herself as beautifully in Arabic yet. She's working on her Arabic to get to feel like she can express herself better in Arabic. But these are translations, and you heard from one of the translators was in that discussion. So she's actually writes originally in Hebrew, and we're reading the translation.
Those are really interesting. So, so those are certainly the issues that present themselves, but actual aspects of Israel are represented, and Sean just specifically covered that. How do you identify as both neither or blended, but the whole, and you can find yourself missing all the time, and all the issues that are listed in bullet points. How would I bring this to my community? So this year I'm going to be teaching 7th graders and hoping to be able to approach more substantive topics than I've been able to in the past. I think that this poem might be a little bit too sophisticated for that group. I do wonder if it's something that could at least be touched on in Kahuta or with small groups with them, and then maybe, but I think it might be too old for them. If I do teach a unit on Israel, I'll probably include but right now, I don't have any particular groups that I think this would fit well with unless I start teaching sort of work with adults beyond just in group. But I think that this poem would be a beautiful way to represent on a very humane level, very approachable, humane level, the angst that someone would go through. I know some people criticize that. Why would you not want to become an Israeli citizen? It's a democratic process. Why would you not want to have all of these amenities, be part of the democratic process? And I think that she represents the struggle and the angst that she goes through. Might be trained like people, might be trained Israel. Who am I? What am I not? But anyways, I would love to hear other people's opinion about that.
I'm just going to suggest a point of information that if you have citizenship, it's not something you have to apply to as an Israeli Arab, or if you're self-identifying as a Palestinian Israeli, if you're within the borders of the state of Israel that are uncontested. Not talking about West Bank, it's a different situation. So it can also mean how much you work with the establishment. When she goes to an Israeli university, she's studying in an Israeli university. And there are Israeli Arabs or Palestinian Arabs who study in Israeli universities with Jews. And there are things that come up for them. Maybe they wear traditional garb, she doesn't. So she's not necessarily immediately identified as a Palestinian or Arab woman. But it's about, are you what in America might have been called an Uncle Tom by working with the establishment as opposed to opposing the establishment? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. One so yes. And I want to clarify too, so there are different statuses of Arabs in Israel. So as Susie said, in established pre-1967 borders, Arabs that live in those places are Israeli citizens who don't have to do anything. In Jerusalem, which is sovereign of Israel, is the sovereign of United Jerusalem, but East Jerusalem, the part that is, I don't even want to use any of the words because it's not the parts of Jerusalem that are considered Palestinian or Jordanian, and that's a whole other conversation. Those citizens, those individuals are citizens of the city of Jerusalem. They have municipal citizenship and they can opt to apply for citizenship in Israel. Okay, so I'm not sure, I don't think she's alluding to that, but just that you should know that the Palestinians that live in Jerusalem have separate status in Palestinians that live in places like Jaffa and Galilee and the Bedouins. And, you know, and I actually just this trip met a Palestinian from East Jerusalem who had just become an Israeli citizen. A young man, you know, he'd actually already gone through university graduate school. They're probably in his early 30s. He had opted for citizenship, and you know, when he presented to the group I was with, and someone asked him, "Why did you know, choose to become a citizen?" He said, "I see myself as a citizen of the world, and I want the rights of all citizens." You know, so that's a whole other conversation. But just to understand that if she was born in Jaffa, to parents who would be born in Jaffa, and grandparents, you know, people that have lived in Jaffa since 19 whatever, she's a citizen. No questions asked. I mean, lots of questions asked. Politically, legally, she's a
So
citizen.
she didn't have to make a choice about this. She was just born into this. It wasn't something like she decided I want to be in a choice.
Right.
She just wasn't a choice.
Right, but as Susan
But-
said, she made options, she made choices
Yeah.
to go to an Israeli university, to go to an international school in Israel. You know, once you're a citizen, you have all kinds of choices you can make, you know, because you're a citizen in a democratic state, so all kinds of choices. Yeah.
So out of curiosity, why would it be, maybe it's not part of this conversation, but I would be curious at some point to know why the people living in East Jerusalem would have a different choice. Like why is that?
Because the status of Jerusalem is contested. And the sort of the status quo, so status quo is they are citizens of the municipality of Jerusalem. Okay, so they can vote in municipal elections, they go to schools that are run by the municipality of Jerusalem, their garbage is picked up by the municipality of Jerusalem. They get driver's license as residents of Jerusalem. As far as their nationality, that's what's contested. They don't have passports. They have to get what's called laissez-passer, which is a freedom of passage that they get from the Jordanian government, which is a whole, after the 6-Day War, the Jordanian government maintained certain political rights over East Jerusalem, and it's still contested to this day.
And in the old city of Jerusalem, including part of life.
Yes, that's
So,
including, the
Temple
Temple
Mount.
Mount is actually, it's under the authority of what's called the WAQF, WAQF, which is the religious authority. So it's not even a government, it's the religious authority. So that's a whole other conversation. But so Palestinians that live not just in the old city of Jerusalem, but in all the, actually, if you look at a map, probably all the surrounding villages that have become municipal Jerusalem, they are municipal citizens, and they drive their cars on Israeli license plates. They pay taxes to the municipality. Again, they go to schools. They can get jobs in all kinds of places without being citizens of the state. They're citizens of the city.
Do I remember correctly that in East Jerusalem, though, they don't have the same level of infrastructure that?
Yes,
correct.
That's a
That's a very sore point.
and that's because of the politics of the municipality.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, some would say it's racism, some would say it's apartheid, but they are citizens and they are. So that's also a lot of. I met this young man this visit. I also met a very interesting older gentleman who lives in the old city, Jewish gentleman, and he has made his life work to help Jerusalem Palestinians access all their rights. So he is doing exactly this, going to Palestinians in Jerusalem who are municipal citizens and saying, you have the right to Social Security, you have the right to health insurance, you have the right to have your garbage picked up, you have the right to have free access to good libraries and schools and all the municipal communities. Yeah, so they're, you know, it's a very similar problem that we have our cities too.
Yeah.
Can people have the education and the wherewithal to access the power to do the things that need to be done to get your rights? Even, you know, so one could say, obviously, Native Americans, Blacks, Hispanics, they're all citizens of, but they don't have the power, the infrastructure, and the power to do the things that we privileged people have, so. Yeah, so that's where things like saying it's the apartheid state pop up.
David, you'll pop up whenever. if you have
Yeah,
anything.
I was gonna say, Sherry, I have an interesting like podcast or like interview that I can share. I'm gonna share in Schoology. It's from a candidate, Ramadan Dabash, who is an East Jerusalemite and who chose to run in the municipal elections, I think in 2017, breaking an effective boycott for many years and talking about his decision and that kind of dynamic. It's very interesting.
I'd love to hear that.
Thank you, David. You can put it right on that discussion board where we've got all of these links. That'd be awesome. And anyone else, please. Questions,
I
comments?
have a question, but we may have just answered that somewhere woven in there. So I'm thinking about language and labels, and I didn't know these years. So as someone drove me home from the airport within the last few years, and he said, I am Palestinian. So I guess I'm coming back to you and saying, like, I don't understand, like, what does that
What does he
mean?
say?
How
Why is he
stuff
telling you
identified?
this?
Yeah, what was the message?
Well, that is a message.
Yeah.
That there are many cab drivers in Israel.
This is in driving from Chicago tomorrow.
Well, now we're talking Palestinian diaspora.
Uh-huh.
So there are writers whose work you can read who have lived in America and who talk about this identity, just like the Dalai Lama's followers who feel like they're in exile, and like Jews through centuries who felt like they were in exile and might self-identify. Anyway, so yes, it was a statement. It was a statement.
Like but there's no such thing
But
as
that-
Palestinian passport.
But since there is no such thing,
That's what I'm saying.
and when Golda Meir used to mistakenly speak of the fact that there were, no Palestinians. Well, there weren't when she was, for some of the time she was, active in politics, but by the end, there was a Palestinian Arab identity that was evolving and getting stronger. The human beings who lived in Palestine, you could say, were Palestinians. It wouldn't have mattered if they were Jews or Christians or Muslims or whoever they might be. But self-identifying comes with a whole set of definitions and language, sometimes politics in some way or another. But yeah, we used to play this game with Jewish kids and students about, are you an American Jew or are you a Jewish American? And you could play out, on a continuum. Where do you feel like you fit in that continuum of which would you put first? And that's why even when I've talked about it, say some people would say Israeli Arab, some people would say Arab Israeli, some people would say Palestinian Israeli, or just Palestinian. So even which term you choose to use for yourself is very meaningful.
So if Palestinian, there's no such thing as Palestinian.
There is no Palestinian state yet, so there is no such thing as an
If it is not an Israeli citizen and they live in the greater land,
They have to get this laws in place, even so, not just Jerusalem Arabs, this is
West Bank,
all West Bank.
all of West Bank.
Except, I wonder what goes on in Jericho. I
Yeah.
don't know. There are certain, when the Oslo Accord was signed in the 90s, the West Bank was divided into area A, B, and C, and Jerusalem was its own thing.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's A that's the most liberated Palestinian thing, right? Or C, I never remember which side. Whichever end
like
it
at the
is.
moment.
The
It's A.
Yeah.
A is civil and security control for the Palestinians. B
Yeah.
is civil Palestinian control, Israeli security control, and area C is civil and military Israeli control.
Israeli control.
So A is the one that has the most Palestinian control. So they do have a municipal infrastructure in Ramallah.
And Jericho for sure.
Right, and so, and I believe, and David, correct me if I'm wrong, they pay taxes probably, they get, that's all part of it, that the government, the Palestinian government is so corrupt and people are so upset about what happens with the money and all that. But do they pay taxes?
I don't know about the specific tax structure, but like their municipal authority is the Palestinian Authority. It does the water system, the sewage, that kind of schools, et cetera, et cetera. And there's Palestinians like effectively paramilitary or like police services in Area A, and then in Area B it gets complicated because the IDF can incur there more readily and more easy access, so they can go into Area A too for specific things as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so in Area A, so in all these areas, there's still no national government, it's a municipal government, so that the municipalities have to.
But that's, so my biases are gonna start, and my education about this is gonna start coming through, but isn't that because they've refused? And again, bias, and this is only what I've heard, so, I mean, they could have a Palestinian state, they just keep refusing it because that's no, we're gonna touch on another time, or not.
David, do you want to fight?
There's like so much we could do
You
with
wanna get
this,
in
right?
on that, have a keg?
I'd suggest as a starting point, there's the educational bookshop in Jerusalem. The owner's name is Mahmoud Muna. I can put it in the chat as well too. His like big thing is like the idea of Palestinian cultural identity exists across all these different political identities, and Palestinian political identity is what's the limiting factor. You're an Israeli Palestinian, you're a West Bank card holder, you live in Gaza, you're a refugee. He can be a little extreme too, but like it's very clear and his English is very good. So I suggest that as a resource. What was the question though, originally?
Why is there no Palestinians?
Why is there basically no Palestinian state today? If everyone knows there's an issue.
I mean, there's so much.
Like, that's a really big one.
The situation we're in is because in the Oslo Accords were meant as a temporary agreement, and the Palestinian Authority and was set up to be that temporary setup. Now we're 20 plus years in that temporary setup. But yeah.
And this is a contentious conversation, and it's probably not for this.
It's not that we're against having a difficult conversation, it's just
There's not like a clear cut.
Yeah.
It had made B, C, D, and that's the answer today. There are many, so to your, one of the, standard lines is the Palestinians have always refused.
Yeah.
And that's what you were trying to say.
Right. That happened with the partition plan, yes.
Right, but
that's a.
so David, when Oslo happened in 1994, 93, 94, there were things put in place to move things ahead. And that's how we got, some of those things got us to where we are today. In Area A, there's municipal self-determination. And, security self-determination. In Area B, no, and in Area C, absolutely no.
Where is B and C?
So B is, so A is Ramallah and Jericho.
Bethlehem.
I think that one is a B. That one's
Bethlehem
definitely
is a
B,
B.
right, David? I think it is.
It's a major Palestinian hubs. Bethlehem is A, I think. I've gone through a checkpoint to get there. Nablus, Jericho, Ramallah, Hebron in one part, and then the other part is split. B is like a lot of smaller settlements, like less industrial hubs.
Right.
It's about, and then C is like 70% of the West Bank, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, well, C is Jerusalem and parts of Hebron, and where it's totally.
Jerusalem is totally separate.
Yeah,
It's its own thing.
but
Yeah.
but some of those villages that aren't in the municipality of Jerusalem, those are probably in city.
You mean the ones that are on the other side of the separation barrier and don't get
Yeah.
services? Those
Yeah.
are actually technically still the municipality of Jerusalem and not in
Yeah.
Oslo. It's just complicated because of the barrier and nothing gets across.
So like in Shomron and in Judea, like that's.
So those cities like Nablus is up in the shop.
In Shem,
Right,
it would be Hebrew for that.
so it's like it's enclave, so that's the thing, these Palestinian cities are under Palestinian control, and they've got these Jewish settlements around them. And that's part of the contention. So it's not that it's a difficult topic in terms of, who's right, who's wrong, it's more like it's very complicated and gray, and it's all about the delineations on a map and who has power, who has authority and legal authority, not about who has power. So it's not a clear-cut issue. So, another piece of the answer is those names of Gaza. So you know that in Gaza, it's Hamas, and in Ramallah, it's Fatah with the Palestinian Authority, which is sort of the mainstream, and they don't get along.
Right.
And Hamas wants to have the power and the authority area A, but they're stuck in Gaza, which is its own situation.
Physically separated.
Right, so.
And what about, is Golden Heights, is that, which, who does that now?
So,
Asking too many difficult questions.
so the Golan Heights never was.
Annexed.
Right,
And then first to Israel, and it was never Palestine.
it was never
It was
Palestinian, it was
Syrian border.
Syria. There is one area up there, it's called Hardov in Hebrew, and I'm trying to remember what it's called in English. David, what's the name of Hardov in English, do you know?
The mountain, I mean, like,
That's an English name that people know, that when it's written about in the New York Times.
Yeah.
I can't remember, what's it called, I can't remember, it's very contested, about who is like, it goes back and forth, and there's, that, when there were skirmishes up there, that's when the skirmishes are. But the Golan Heights has been legally annexed by Israel. So legally, it's anybody that lives up there is Israeli. But I don't believe in the Golan, I mean, there are Druze.
There
up
were
there.
Druze
Yeah.
villages, so like if this movie, The Syrian Bride, that was made a number of years ago, actually deals with the fact that, some people's families were separated when armistice lines were drawn and, post and wars and during wars, families actually get separated and, if you wanted to have your daughter marry someone from your clan, it's like, how do you get them across the border to a place where they can actually come together?
It's called, in English, it's called the Shiva Farms.
Oh, Shiva Farms.
So when you hear, when they're, God willing, we won't have skirmishes up there for, but when there are skirmishes and it's written about in the American press, it's called Shiva Farms. So I think.
I'm taking up.
No, it's the
Yes.
fact, that's why you chose it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Did any of you have other people who were like experiencing this have anything else or any pressing question that you can post on the we'll get some more research for you?
I'm just in general confused and interested in this topic, so any further exploration would be super.
I think I would also, I put up one of the links to one of the lectures that this person did. The second one, she actually comes, the poet is there and she's interviewed. You might find that interesting too.
But she's
not gonna talk about it as a conflict, she's gonna talk about multiple identities. And we talk, the reason I'm mentioning it is that we talk in Israel education about the fact that our students and we as human beings in the world of July 2022, we have multiple identities. So this is dealing in a very visceral way for her and how she's juggling different identities. But I think that's true also of some of the other issues in Israeli society that we're going to deal with in other presentations. So that could be our segue to the next piece, which
Sure, I'm glad you chose the poem, and I hope that when we start, again, it's not about the politics, but in a sense it is, when she talks about, I'm not accepted, I am accepted, but it's about her experience.
Exactly, and it makes me want to dig deeper. When I hear her experience, it makes me want to understand the situation and understand what she's, what her audience like and people are.
Cindy, I think you should do yours.
Yeah, you don't have a projector, so I'm not sure how we should do this.
What do you?
David, did you watch that music video? I know that you commented like great video. Had you seen it before?
I've seen it before. That's why I commented that. So you can feel free to play it and like don't show me because I've seen it before.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
Okay, so then, yeah, I think that we should probably show it. Where is it? Oh, it's the red, no. Okay, so I'm going to show a video. And everybody should come crowd around here to watch it.
I learned it on that.
This is, up to you, it's your time.
We can watch it in tandem too. But
You're gonna have to see the lyrics. I mean, you can feel free to come around. Or
Is it one of the links that are down here?
do it. It's in my.
I see it, I'm watching it with the.
Okay, are you ready? It's gonna have subtitles in the Ready?
בואו נדבר דבורים, לא מבין באיזה קטע אתם ערבים כועסים. עושים שוויון זכויות ואצלנו במדינה לחיות, אבל צבא אתם לא עושים. חנין זועבי, אחמד טיבי, לא סתם אנחנו תמכוכם. דרדתם לקלפי ושוב קיבלתם עושים. להאמין בדו-קיום זה סתם להיות נאיבי. אז הוא מרגיע, כשאני שומע את המבטא אני תמיד כזה. אגב תגיד לי ישראל, הוא מפסיקים להסכים. אתה מסתכל עם פלסטיני איזה שני שפים? שמע, איפה שיש ערבים יש מבואים. תרקמו כספים להיכנס למדורים, ותפסיקו להתחיל להיות אנשים. אתם מגדירים מאבק, ותחכו למשפחה למחיה ונסגר, ואין בחמודים, ואין בחטובים. מתמודדים ציון, מבינה חומר, מפתינה לשמישה חלקות, ואז תמיד להקטירות מתי תקשיבו ברחובות. זה לא משתי עצום, אפילו בדואים לא משמדים נראה לי חשוב. איך אתה מתמודדים? אתה מוכר, מוכיח, יש ערבי שהיה בדיוויזיות כתוב. אז מה לחכות שזה בחתות תיקח כאילו התחתות בחיון? אין לנו חוק חיון. תמודדו דבר לבנות קהילה, נתחיל משם. שבוע עולם, נתחיל זוגית כמו כולם, שכי אותך את הקורונה ותפחו לעולם. אני חיובי, אני לא גזען, הגנה שלי עליו. אני לא גזען, אני קורא בשר בחינם וגם נגיד לו ביפו אצל זה ערבים. פשוט דיברתי איתך, קשה לראות את היום שנוכל לחיות בשלווה, כנראה כאן הצדק שצריך הפרדה, אולי באמת עדיף לכם בעזה ובגדה. אני לא גזען, אני נשמע, אבל יש לנו מקום תרבותי ויש כאן סיבה, יהדות תתנו עולם, חיים ואהבת חינם, ואתם הולכים ילדים לסיעה השם נפלה מן האדם. ולא אכפת לכם יאללה ונכבה והג'יהאד והכבוד ששולט ביצר, אנשים שמקיפים להילחם בכל היתר, ציבור עיוור שחושב והכל מתמודד, תתראה לנו לעקור, תתנו גם השאלה, תאשימו את כולם במקום להביט במראה. תנו לנו יותר מסגרות, לפחד ולא נסות, להתקרב יחד לחיות נראה שאין מה לעשות. אז תמצאו יותר, למה שלא תעשו שירות לאומי לעשות צבא? אתם מעיפים לקחת תקציבים, לא תשרתו את המדינה מבחינתי אתם מעיפים מהערבים. אני לא גזען, פשוט תופס באחד זה הכל. צריך להתחתן עם לוסי, זה גדול, אני לא שייך לשמאל, תוכל שספור אותה להביא סתם בלי שום סוף. אני חושב שאפשר גם אחרת, הרי הגעתם לחברי הכנסת וגם לנבחרת, אבל גם שאתם לא באמת רוצים להתחלק, שתולה מסתכלים בגב, זה לעמלק, יאללה הרבה תפיח יחמם, וזה תמיד היית טוב, ואל תעשה לי עבודה ערבית, ואל תעבוד חפוף, אם אתה אומר לו זה תמיד יש תחליף, הוא קורא להביא גם מסודר עם כיף. אני לא גזען, מבין שיש עוד צד לסיפור, הוא לא חי בסוף. אני לא גזען, אנחנו חולקים את המדינה ועשו גם לנו בלב. לפני שמזור את העילה אחרת. שפט ושאלה גזען. בואו נדבר דורי, אתם היהודים שהחלטתם מה זה להיות מיעוט. אתם קוראים דוח, אבל עכשיו נשאר קוראים מאפרטהייד בגזענות. ודי מחלקה תרבותית, חצי מהלקסיקון שלכם מילים בערבית. סבבה, דחקה יאללה בעשרה חלק אלוהים, רס משחק ערבית, עשתי בחיים תרבותים. חס, על הפלסטינים עדנו שום חלק זה. אמר קלבין זנים, עלם מדברת, ולא נביחה יתוסי כג'לת זמן הגבלת. אני מדבר על מדינת ונגד אלימות. הסרעי זה חזיין, כיתי התנגדות, כשפותחים בגף ודגים לצורות, אני בשביל זה שזה מציאות השתות. דברים ערבים טוב, זה ערבים נם. ואז עוד מתעוננים שלא משרת. הממשלה הזו עושה אותי איזה חסות בית. כל מלחומי על הסרת הגזים. מגן תמיד ינתן משתלח בנשים. שוטר איתו מלחמה ופועל ויומעים. עיתון לשבע ליצא, שבע לשנים. אתה תדבר כבר שוויון בנטל, שאין לנו שום שוויון. שאת תשתוק תקשיב, זה דבר ראשון. איך אני אקים עסק אם אני לא נכנס למורדון? גם מזרחים מוכנים בחרא זה בגלל מדיניות. זה לא נורמלי. 48 דירה של המשפחה שלי. אבל היה אחד שבחר ומדברים, חודשים ומכחישים שמות האמת חלונאים. דעה ושערים, דעה ושער. מתקשת כל שבת, ועדה לבדה. אתה לא לחבר דובר כל ביטה בלדה. ועשה לי להגיד שהרס אין המפעל. וכל שמודות ומשפויות. ושכם 22 דמוקרטיות. גם צריך דבר כמו היום ומסכים. אני זה אני נורא אין צעד סרסלי. אני לא גזען, אני משתדל הייתי משאיך בזמן, חלק מנתחיל לשיח בשם האסלאם, ורסקי שאתם מבצעים מאז רצח, כמה רצח שם, לכם מכסף וכוח, והכיבוש, ושתות של אנשים גזענים. אם מדינת תל אביב הזאת שמאלנים, אבל לפחות הם מנסים להיות אותנו כשווים. על מישור סויק, בסיסיה, וכעת אני מקבוס ומביא לתפילת. חלקתי לזור שקל, בני איש, ומנעו יחייתם ולעלם. אתה בודק אל עצמך, אבל פוגע בי. אתה עוד תלמד לקבל אותי, על ערבי. אם רק נפתח את הלב ואת העיניים לסחבי, נראה שיש אותו אלה כומרים ברבי. أنا مش عنصري بديك بكره يتخلفين يعرف إني عملت المستحيل. أنا دي زعل ليش أنا ناقص خالد في كرش عم بتخيل.
Was the first time you saw this advised? And there's your answer. There's the answer.
By the way, great vehicle for learning Hebrew. Actually, outstanding,
Yeah.
this one.
So it's a really heavy video. And the name really says it all. Let's talk straight, and they sure spoke straight. Really like said it like it is. So brief synopsis of it, though you just watched it. This was like underneath, this is like from the official YouTube video that they posted. And I thought they put it into words better than I could when they did it in my recording. So they said, this social project was inspired by Joyner Lucas's song, I'm Not Racist, as after watching it, I decided to embark on a 3-year journey, traveling, researching, and collecting opinions of diverse Jews and Arabs across Israel. It mirrors the extreme voices I encountered, blinded by fear and nurtured by simplistic narratives. We, the young generation, had enough. We believe in change and we want to live and love. By promoting authenticity, understanding, and complexity, in speaking the moderate truth, we can let go of past traumas and build a better future together. So I think that really like speaks volumes to what the point of the music video was and like where those words came from, right? It's like not just these two singers or rappers like and their beliefs, that it was collected through a project and it's representative of the extremes. And you know, I mean, when you think about the issues that were represented within that, I mean, there's a gazillion. It doesn't just focus on one. It's from everything from who does the menial jobs in Israel, to who serves in the IDF, to Gaza, to occupation, to apartheid, like all of these different words were brought up. Who's my gardener? I'm not racist. All of these things. I shop at a hookah place, you know, and it's really there are so many issues that are covered within this one video. So as I think about how we can use this, I mean, this is like, to me, that this really speaks to teens, and it's, I ran something for my students based on something I did for, I don't even remember which class anymore, but Susie, one of the three, I think it was mom, with Shira Stick Air, which is great, and it was amazing, except that that's, looking back on it now, it's like 2002, I think, 2003, 2001. And this is really modern, like this is really recent. This was posted a year ago. So it still is very fresh and relevant. And I think that it's a really great way to start talking about it with teens. I think that in terms of accessibility, it would be very important to have a copy of the lyrics because it moves really fast, and if you don't know Hebrew to be able to follow along with English, it can be very confusing. It's confusing for me, and I've seen it like 4 times. But that's something that I would do. But I think that with teens, young adults, I mean, I think that teens is kind of like that base level, and I would say like high school teens. Like I don't think I would show this to middle schoolers who would understand it. But you know, to be able to like pull out, I thought about doing it from this way, and then I decided because we didn't have the lyrics not to, but I think a great activity could be, highlight some lines that you have a question about, circle ones that you agree with, circle the square things that you really disagree with, or whatever it may be, and then having them go through with a Rita partner and picking those out, asking the questions of one another. I think it brings up it enlightens me, and as I'm sure many other people who watch it, when we only hear one side of the narrative, and it helps you hear both within a short amount of time.
Next question, please. Love that. I wonder how they chose which side was going to rap first. I also wonder if you listened to if you flipped it and how, like, what message, if the message would come across the same. And if you were teaching in the class, would you play it one way and then try to figure out a way to like flip it?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, here's how.
So the first time that we watched this, we first watched a like a news segment on it from I-24 News, and in the news segment, it went back and forth between the Arab and the Israeli, and that was so I'd never seen the video. So going into watching the video for the first time, that's what I thought I was going to see. It was like back and forth, like one person would say something and then he would respond, and then something and respond, and back and forth, and that's not at all what it was. And I think that does change it. It's like a very different thing to do. It's like get out all your thoughts without anybody interrupting you and needing to like back yourself up versus having to respond. And we see that like in arguments that we have, whether it's about Israel or just generally, that like so often we're thinking of the next thing that we want to say and we're not actually listening. So I think that was also a big point of it. It's like, I'm gonna get everything out before you say anything else. And the second one wasn't necessarily even a response. It was just, again, now it's his turn to get all his thoughts out.
That's interesting. So it's not a response to the first one. It's just an
I don't
opportunity
think so.
to speak your mind.
I didn't think it was a response. I mean, but it's art, you can interpret it kind of way.
My two thoughts.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I had two thoughts when my first thought was the whole thing about I'm not racist and all the you know, the catchphrases that people kind of hang on to, or maybe think about things like, oh, well, what about black on black crime? Oh, well, how come your problems don't hang around? But, you know, just all this stuff that we hear in rural America against, you know, anti-black something. That was one thing. The second thing was, how interesting would it be to have all of the lyrics with hyperlinks in them that address every assumption or cliche, and then be able to click on that and have a whole bunch of resources that explain what exactly is going on with this cliche or this assumption, and talk about the truth about it.
Yeah. I just thought of something else too. I don't know if this would work at all, but also like taking all the lyrics and jumbling them up, and it's like, who said it?
Right.
And you can't even, some of them obviously would be very clear, but like before anybody watches this, right? Like, who do you think said this line? Do you think it's an Arab? Do you think it was an Israeli? Because so many of the things that they're both saying could just flip-flop and it would be the same thing. And so like I think about that a lot. And then I think one thing that I forgot to say in my spiel, I think the ending is unbelievably powerful. When the Arab finishes speaking, they sit together and they break bread, and they are eating hummus and pita, and they're working together. Like when you think about like the setting, right? They're working in like an auto body shop, and they're clearly the ideas that they're co-workers, they're coexisting, they're living and working together in the same place, and they're sitting there and then they break bread at the end, and it's okay. Well, actually, let's eat, and that is it. Like to me, like that's symbolic of like the future, the hope for the future, right? Like this is the now, and when you sit together and share a meal, that's what they hope to continue.
They end with, we both have to, this is our country,
Right.
we've got to figure this out. We only have one country. for both of us. Interesting play on the fact that the garage setting, often the people working as mechanics in the garage are Arabs or Palestinian Israelis. And the owner of the garage, maybe a Jewish Israeli, that's possibly something you're playing with. But what I found wonderful and continue to read about it and hear about it, they've turned this into a whole project for peace and dialogue. They did take all the stereotypes. It's not like the Palestinian is a rapper, that's his kind of profession. The Israeli Jew was an educator, and he decided to make this his life's work. And so they do tours and they do workshops.
There's a second
now.
one.
And now there's, yes, okay.
I was gonna say, I'm noticing there's a Let's Talk Straight too, so number 2. So I'm curious where they go with that, or is it, like, I haven't seen, I just see it's there. And like, are they answering each other's questions, or are they
I
continuing
don't know, I haven't
to?
seen it yet.
Yeah.
Put that link up for us on that discussion board. It's a great idea.
So I love all the ideas that are coming out of this, and I love also seeing that this thing is a vehicle potentially to teach for kids to listen to Hebrew. Just to pull up, parts of it are in Arabic, right? Or that number one, it's like to pull that up. But the irony and the humor is both in that Dubri, come let's talk straight. Dubri is an Arab word. So come let, so when the Arab rattles off, you also, the Israeli, the Jew rattles off, why don't you ever learn Hebrew? And, I don't understand your Arabic. And the Arab Palestinian rattles off, half the words are already in Arabic.
All slang words.
And he rattles off.
So,
Yeah, so that's, so there's an irony even in so to
Nice.
teach the
Nice.
kids the word dubri,
Yes.
which is Israelis use it all the time. Going into very dubri, and the parents said, like I'm gonna tell you straight up. And it's an Arab word. So I think that's really curious and, not just curious, but I think it's good to point out to the point of coexistence also. But the other thing, really writing the lyrics out and potentially to the hyperlink idea, which words are resonant for Arabs and which words come from Jewish culture. And when the Arab says at the end, neither of us have another country, that phrase of I don't have another country. It's a very popular Israeli song in the 50s. In there, I don't have another country. And the Arab, takes that and says, we both don't have another country. This is so the mushing to get the cultural integration between the two cultures. And again, here are two young men who, this is their life. And this reality is, been 75 years on paper and, 100 and thousands of years of embedded culture and history. So, let's move forward. So I think there is a very positive note there, and a real opening for kids.
I posted the link for
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you look at the piece about language, that is something about choices that are made. So if it's a state school in an Arab village, ostensibly there's some Hebrew language instruction, but that's not always fully enforced. Just like there's supposed to be some teaching that would happen in a Jewish school that maybe doesn't always happen. There's a lot of leeway when you close the classroom door, or people choose to share or don't. There is, to Marion's point about the language, the fact that in recent past, there was kind of a demotion of Arabic when the state of Israel was founded. You'll see on every street sign, for example, in Israel, you'll see Hebrew, Arabic, and English. The English is because of the British Mandate period, but there was a conscious decision that at least that Hebrew and Arabic should both be there. And there's kind of a demotion with the whole Israel as a Jewish state kind of legislation that happened in the Knesset in the past couple of years that has done a subtle or not so subtle demotion of. So there are fewer schools. At my daughter's school, it was a choice on French Hill in Jerusalem, which is, some would say, occupied territory from the 67 war. Out my daughter's window was the Israeli village of Issawiya,
The Arab,
which is, I'm sorry, the Israel, well,
the Jerusalem.
the Jerusalem Arab village of Issawiya, which is where we all go to the gas station, and that's what everyone in that area uses for the gas station, whatever. It used to be very peaceful when we lived there in the 90s, and it is now a hotbed of unrest today. But my daughter's school, they chose to have the kids studying Arabic starting in 4th grade, and the conservative movement high school continued, so she continued from 7th grade on. She was only there through 7th grade. But not every Israeli school has that. So, there is a movement among liberal people in Israel who say, how are we ever going to make peace if we don't really speak the other's language? The New Israel Fund runs mini Ulpan courses in Arabic for Israeli Jews. And I've taken one for American Jews, a 7-week course in Arabic.
This seems really parallel to the United States in some ways, because there's that sentiment about you're here learning English, even though we took your land from you, and we were, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying that there's some ideological parallel.
Sure, and I'd say that the Palestinian rapper who's singing, his Hebrew is outstanding. His Hebrew is amazing. So when the Jewish guy says, you should speak Ivrit Metukenet, like perfect grammatic Hebrew, most Israelis don't speak perfect grammatic Hebrew at all, and they have stuff mixed from different languages, outside of Hebrew. So part of it's tongue in cheek and is a little sarcastic, but they each went out and interviewed many people to gather these stereotypical statements. So they didn't just come up with them, on their own. It was a project where they went out and they had community meetings and pulled that together.
Fantastic. Seriously fantastic.
Is it a newer, I mean, I can think of at least 3 people I know who are Israeli who are taking Arabic in some way. Is that a new thing as a level of acceptance in order, not acceptance, but olive branch in order to learn?
Well, I mean, again, like who sponsors these classes? It's the New Israel Fund, which has but I'm just saying. So I'm gonna get there. So New Israel Fund is the one who is sponsoring it for American, but there is a fund, the Abraham Fund, that does sponsor these for Israelis. So like social workers, nurses will come in and do like this Arabic Ulpan course where they're really learning a lot. We just did 7 sessions and another 7 for a second set. So there have always been those, but again, who chooses to enroll in that?
Right.
It's especially helpful in the mixed cities like Yaakov, and Akko.
And people will claim, we can't do anything unless we learn. So,
And language is also culture, so it's everything.
and who knows what the school,
Right.
most Israeli Jews who are fluent in Arabic did that consciously, because they wanted to either be involved in politics and in peacemaking, or clearly in the army, kids that know Arabic get placed into units where Arabic is.
Intelligence units.
Interesting. And actually in the rap, there's an allusion to Gouda, but.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Exactly.
Yes, it was Lucy Aharish, who was a Palestinian reporter. And she's married to Safi Levy, who's one of the actors, one of the stars of the show Power. So.
Not married in Israel, right? Can't get married.
And
Well,
you can be married civilly somewhere else.
Right.
They are
Marriage.
Yeah. Just can't get married in Israel.
Like, you can't do,
No, I know about that, but who are the 2 people that are married?
a Fowler star is married to a newscaster, and a Fowler star is Israeli and a
Jewish,
newscaster.
Israeli Jewish.
Israeli and the newscaster is Arab. Okay.
Arab Israeli.
I mean, I didn't obviously saw it, but I think one of the lines is something like you think it's all about Gouda.
Right, or you think, like, the fact that they got married, like, that solves everything. There's one example.
There's, oh,
Go ahead, David.
no, I was gonna say, just like one piece of like nuance here is the criticism too, that even if you take Arabic in the school, a lot of the teachers come from the army and it's like very like geared towards intelligence, and like the examples come from that, and there are movements of trying to like place more actually native Arabic speakers as Arabic teachers, or like changing curriculum around so it's not so guided and centric towards it as well too.
Yeah, absolutely. So the efforts that are happening now in those few Israeli schools that choose to do it is they're bringing native Arabic speakers who are not Jewish to come and teach in the schools. And it's all about, the woman who was my teacher, she talks about how what she was bringing was a whole culture. There are some cultural things that you really need to know that are just very different for the Jewish populations in Israel and the non-Jewish populations in Israel. So you can't be sensitive to those things if you've never had a chance to learn them or be exposed to them. So she talks a lot about how language is culture. It's just not language like so that you could go and buy meat in an Arab village or, you know, get your car fixed at an Arab garage where it'll be cheaper and better. And then there are stereotypes as if Arab labor, which is the name of this amazing Israeli TV series, which if anybody wanted to borrow this DVD and play it, it's in TSC. This was based on an Israeli Arab who now calls himself Palestinian, so he was changed his name Saeed Kashua, and he grew up in an Israeli Arab village, but he was sent to Jerusalem to the high school that's for gifted kids, and he was the only Israeli Arab in the school. So that's a whole thing, and he writes in Hebrew. But anyway, this is kind of a satirical look at what it means to be in Israeli society, and Arab labor is actually considered bad labor or poor quality labor, where much of the building that happens in Israel and the quality labor that happens is Arab labor. So there was a thing about, you know, if you don't want to work in doing our construction, we can always get some Sudanese refugees to do it. There were so many possible things to explore in this that could, you know, never do all of them now, but just thinking about this as an entry point for people to choose, you know, one or two things even to explore more deeply.
Yeah. So it lives in Schoology there, obviously lives on the web, and I would urge people who, you know, it seems like most of us are intrigued by the possibilities. And has the iCenter done anything with it yet, other than just presented? Like, did they create any materials around it yet?
No. About the rap, no, they shared it at this was the first iFellow seminar where they shared it.
In May.
This past May. Yeah. So, you know, many of us saw it when it came out, you know, over a year ago.
Yeah, so I think just something that you chose it for today, and you know, for you to take it and go further with it, and I think for any of us to use it, and to share with each other, to translate, and find title links for things, really good ideas. Great. All right, David, how much longer can you stay with us? Just 10 minutes?
Just about 8 minutes or so.
Okay. Great, thank you. So I think, do we need a break or just even a stretch? Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break. So David, I guess we'll hang up on with you.
Well, actually, we'll talk to you for a minute about the things that you missed that you can
Sounds
do
good.
online.
Okay.
We'll figure out how you
And then we'll do the Zionist ideas. Right, cool. Excellent.
בואו נדבר דוגרי.
בוא נעשה את זה.
Amazing, amazing. First, I have a quick question for you. First, it's so great to have you here.
I know, it's so nice to see you. I get to see your face now too.
I know, I miss you. I really miss you. So first, first question is so the thing we're going to do next is something that we've done with a couple of cohorts, but I'm not sure if we did it with your cohort because I get them mixed up just a little bit.
Mine was
And I
the
know
all
you-
online one. That's the one.
You know, some stuff when it was online, it was
Sure,
different
sure.
and we didn't get to do some stuff. So the thing that we're going to do now is looking at the Zionist Ideas by Gil Troy.
Mhm.
And looking at, you know, different askolot, you know, different schools of Zionism.
Mhm.
I think maybe, did you do that once?
I think I've done it. I've also seen Karen Freeman facilitate it for
Yeah.
Hillel professionals.
Yeah,
You have
so
like
you-
Louis
so you
Brandeis
kinda
and
got-
like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So she does one a lot with like, for like people like Hillel, et cetera, where she'll just focus on American Zionists.
Yeah,
and
I've
like
done,
diaspora Zionism,
she's done all 6 streams
or she's done
within the
all
book.
6, great.
And then,
great.
yeah,
All right, so you've done that already. So we're, but I know when you usually do the thing, like when they're gonna do it, they're gonna pick one to look at in depth.
Mhm,
and then-
exactly.
So, so what I would suggest is all of this stuff is up on Schoology.
Okay.
And for you, pick one that you haven't done. So
Sure.
there's a link to the folder.
Right,
from the- Yeah, let me let you get there.
I'm looking here, course materials, Zionist ideas yesterday and the day in person. Primary sources for in-person enrichment and imagining a Jewish state then and now.
Yes, that one, that one. So the PDF is like the instructions for what
And
you
I
would
see
use.
the Google Drive folder.
Yeah, so in the folder is the 6 subfolders.
Mhm.
Do you remember which one you looked at when you did it before?
I don't know, but I'm gonna look at revisionist because that's the one I always want to learn more about and like don't know
Okay,
a lot
cool.
about.
Well, that'll also work for this other thing that you're gonna get to do online, which is we have anthems from Shir HaPalmach and a Lechi song, a Stern Gang, and an Etzel song,
Okay, cool.
and Shir Beitar. So that'll fit with the Jabotinsky revisionist stuff.
Yeah,
So you'll find it interesting. So you know what, that's perfect. In fact, you could pick that. In fact, you could pick that anthem if you want, or either one anyway. Irgun Etzel all started from the same ideology. So I'll make sure that that's live for you to do at your leisure. You don't have
Thank
to
you.
do it, obviously not today. And then there's a timeline exercise that Marion will have to put back up. That can definitely be done remotely, but we did
Got it.
that live this morning.
Oh, fun, great.
Yeah. And then she'll also give you the answer key for it and the PDFs for printing it out if you ever wanted to work with it yourself.
Wonderful, thank
All
you.
right. So it's been fun, but sometimes what we're finding with like the news articles and the literature stuff, it takes more than 15 minutes to unpack.
It's hard to unpack that much, yeah.
Marion's like, come on, we'll just do 15 minutes, like be quick. And no, you can't really. You can't
Well,
really. So
I'll
it's-
try for my.
No. Well, it's honestly, it's been so valuable. The debrief is the most important part because
It seems, I mean,
it
I
helps-
heard it a little bit, but it seems like it's been a
Right.
very impactful experience, yeah.
Yeah, so because you don't know what people in your learning audience know until they get to ask questions or, there's just hard to anticipate. The same is true when you're doing the timeline exercise, which you'll get. So, but in any case, it's all a learning experience. Each way, however you do it is a learning experience.
Sure.
How is your stuff going so far?
It's good.
You've done some teaching?
Yeah, so I'm responsible for like an Israel education session. Supposed to be about like multiple narratives specifically.
Yes,
And I got
nice.
to teach that for the first time this morning, which was great. It's a group of like development people actually, which is very interesting but fun.
Interesting.
And I'm also like running a few. We have my team is running 3, one on pluralism, one on Israel, and one on just like envisioning an educational arc over the course of a college career.
Ooh, nice.
And so I've done the pluralism one twice now, and I get to run the Israel one with all the springboards with the entry level Hillel professionals now, so it's very exciting.
Fun.
That's great.
All right, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm gonna let you go.
Great.
And so you'll have time to prepare and, breathe and do a bio break.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
All right.
And I'll message you again in the morning. My schedule.
Perfect. That's
hopefully
perfect. That
doesn't-
worked perfectly. You text me in the morning. We make sure we've got it all set up with the
Great.
Zoom, etc.
Thank you again. This is wonderful.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
big F's in it.